method to make you understand easily rather than going deeper into the theoretical knowledge. The first one being the Trademark Express, wherein we'll be stopping by certain stops, which are our treaties, and we'll discuss what each of that stop helped us to do. And the second one, obviously, being the Geographical Indication Express, similarly on the grounds of the Trademark Express. Okay, so this is a basic analogy that will be taking into force to understand what basically these treaties made it to do. Okay, so when we just a second, yes. So this is a brief overview of what we'll be covering today. We move on to the first train. We get into the first train, which is our Trademark Express, which has 8 major stops. Okay, 8 major stops being representing 8 treaties that were signed over the period of around hundreds of years to get this trademark law that is existing today come into force, how it developed. Okay, so we start from the Paris Convention in 1883, then we move to the Madrid Agreement in the 1891, then we go to 1957's Nice Agreement, 1989's Madrid Protocol. We'll also discuss the major difference between what is Madrid Agreement and what is Madrid Protocol. Then we talk about the Trademark Law Treaty of the 1999, the CIS Anti-Counterfeiting Treaty of the 2005, and then finally we close the Trademark Express. We arrive at the destination of the Singapore Treaty of the 2006. Of course, in 1994, we also have the TRIPS Agreement, but the TRIPS Agreement we'll be discussing when we talk about GI. Okay, these are the major treaties that formed the trademark law as we see today. Okay, so we'll be focusing on these major 8 destinations, 8 stops that we'll be going through. I hope the slides are visible to everyone. Okay, thank you so much. Yes, so when we talk about we've boarded the Trademark Express, we come to the first stop of Trademark Express, which is the Paris Convention, which came into force in the 1883, which basically laid down the foundation of what we today call as a trademark law. Okay, so in the year 1883, if everybody is aware of the history, we know that it was the Industrial Revolution that was shaping up. Then we had certain European businesses that started the export-import of their goods, of the local goods that they made across various borders. And then there was this thing that happened, which now we know call as copies. Okay, so there were certain products, there were certain goods which had their specialty from a particular place or particular brand, but because of the export import and no regulation on who could do what, there were certain problems that existed, due to which we had problems like counterfeiting products or copying of the products. For example, let's take an example. When we go back to the Industrial Revolution, there is an Austrian watchmaker who has built a very nice analog watch. Okay, and who is exporting the watch to, let's say, some country. Let's take an example, is exporting it to Paris. Okay, now a French company, by the time the export reaches to Paris, a French company comes out and copies the same analog watch design. Now, since during the Industrial Revolution, there was nothing known as trademark and your monopoly over your brand, there was no question as to how this Austrian brand can say that mine is the original product. That is where the question came out, and that is why we now see the Paris Convention, which came into force in 1883. And this solved 3 major problems, which we can say were the 3 major principles of the Paris Convention. which we can again understand through the three main pillars of the Paris Convention. The first one being the national treatment. Now, this talks about giving equal treatment to the products. Okay, so let's say, for example, if you are a member of an X country, then you will be treated exactly the same way if you go to B country. For example, if that same Austrian watchmaking company went to France to get his or her trademark registered, then this Paris Convention helped him to understand that the French people will treat him the way the French citizens are actually treated. Okay, so the trademark office in France will treat him in the same way the office in France will treat the French citizen X. Okay, I hope I'm making any understanding here. Is it like, are you able to get what I'm telling? Okay. Okay, thank you. So this is the first principle that the Paris Convention talked about, which talks about that even if you go to a foreign land, you will be treated how the citizen is treated in that particular country. Okay, you will not be treated in a way that, okay, you are a foreigner, so we'll give you a trademark in a differential sense, or we'll speed up your trademark registration. No such privileges, no such formulation procedures were established for people who want to register their trademarks out of their own native countries, right? So this was a very genuine mark when we talk about setting the foundation, because as we saw that counterfeiting, the copying of the goods, you were not able, during those times people were not able to get into what is the source of the good, right? So this was a very clever point wherein the Paris Convention cleared all the doubt that whatever is the source will be easily identifiable. Now, it helped solve a massive practical problem, which said that before these the second pillar was the priority rights. Okay, so before the Paris Convention, there was a problem of how will you be able to uh, register your trademark outside of your native country. Let's say, for example, before the Paris Convention, it was the scene that if I am registered as a my brand is registered as a trademark in India and I want to register it same in the US, there was no particular procedure as to how will I be able to register there. Okay, will the main question was, will I even be able to register there? Or let's say, for example, my brand is ABC Limited, which sells certain clothes and lifestyle products. The same ABC Limited in USA sells FMCG products, right? So if I have registered my trademark in the year, let's say 1974, but I did not register my trademark in the US, and that particular ABC Limited in the US who is selling FMCG products comes out that in 1975 I have registered my trademark, right? So now this is a confusion whether which ABC Limited is doing what, right? So this is where the priority rights came into force. Now, what do you mean by priority rights? Priority rights says that if in your native country, let's say, for example, the ABC Limited in India has registered a trademark in the year 1974. 1st January 1974 is when it registered, right? So from that 1st January 1974, you have 6 months, which talks about 1st June 1974. This 6 months period time is given to you to register your trademark outside of your native countries, right? For example, I want to go to US, I want to go to Canada, I want to go to Japan, I want to go to South Africa. Wherever I want to go, I have this 6 months period wherein I can show them that I have my trademark in India. I want you to give me trademark on the basis of my Indian trademark in your own country, right? So when, let's say, for example, that ABC Limited of the US comes to US in the year 1975, its trademark will be rejected. Why? Because the 6 months period that I used it and I registered my trademark in US way back in 1974. Okay, I hope the priority rights is clear. The second pillar of the Paris Convention. Right now, when we talk about the thank you. When we talk about the third pillar of the Paris Convention, we talk about Article 6Bs. Okay, so now again, there are when you look into the bare treaty of the Paris Convention, you'll notice that there are certain words written after article numbers. Okay, so those are basically the ABCs, 6A, 6B, 6C of the Paris Convention, written in French numerical way. Okay, that is just a way of writing of it. So 6Bs is basic, you can consider it as Article 6 subclause B. Okay, just for your understanding, right? So that talked about the well-known marks. Now, what are well-known marks? It said that even though you have not registered your trademark, but in case in your own jurisdiction your trademark becomes very popular, very famous, is when you will be given a, a name tag of a well-known mark. For example, if you take example of the Indian brands like your Haldiram, okay, which is a snack company in India, right? So it did not register a trademark initially, but now I guess since past 1 year or so, they are known as the well-known marks, okay? Because everybody in India know Haldiram as a snack company, right? Similarly, there are you can take an example of Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola initially did not register itself as a trademark. It got a well-known mark status, and then later on, because it wanted to expand, it got itself trademark. Right. So this was the main importance of the well-known marks, just to take into consideration the brands that existed before the Paris Convention was signed. Okay, so before the 1880s, whatever the brand that existed, just to keep those in mind and give them their own monopolies, this particular article came into force. Now, there are various other articles in this convention. Will not go deep into each of the article because, of course, we have time constraint. We'll just cover main topics of every treaty, and so this was basically about the Paris Convention. Now, you can conclude Paris Convention in a way that Paris Convention is equals to national treatment plus priority rights plus Article 6Bs. Now, these are the three main things because of which the Paris Convention came into force and the Paris Convention talked about, right? So these are the three problems that existed. Okay, so now if we talk about what kind of problems that exist, one, difficulty in getting monopolies. Two, what about outside my own country? And three, what about my existence before Paris Convention, right? So these three problems were solved in the Paris Convention due to these three pillars. I hope the Paris Convention is clear. If I can just get some thumbs up so that we can move to the next treaty. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. We move on to the next one. Okay. So now we boarded the Trademark Express. The first stop was the Paris Convention. Now comes the second stop, which is the Madrid Agreement, the 1891 Madrid Agreement. Now, why was Madrid Agreement required when in the first place Paris Convention already existed? Right? Paris Convention was signed in 1883. Then why do you need a new treaty in the year 1891? So there were certain problems, such as the Paris Convention gave us three principles. Okay. Then these principles were not able to be considered when you talk about micro businesses. Okay, on a micro level, the Paris Convention was very much fruitful, very much useful during the when you look at the world whole together, or when you look at the members altogether. But when you talk about certain businesses at the domestic level, it was very difficult because the businesses at the domestic level still did not have a clear idea of how do I file my trademark or where do I file my trademark. right? So that is why we required the Madrid Agreement. Again, a new problem arose. Where do I file it? How do I file it? And that is why Madrid Agreement came into force in the year 1891. Okay. There was also this problem of languages and the way the trademark filing was done. Okay. So you'll be getting all the materials. Okay. As and when the work is done, please just concentrate on the session right now. Okay. So let's say, for example, a company in Japan who is selling certain electronic devices has registered its trademark in Japan, but now it wants to register its trademark in um, India, in Afghanistan, in Sri Lanka, etc., etc. Right? So now what we see is there are different official languages of each of these countries. So it will be difficult for it becomes very difficult for the Japanese country to file its trademark in all of these countries because of the differential languages and the differential trademark procedure. And hence, the Madrid Agreement came into force. It gave us a way of how can you file, when can you file, until when can you get the monopoly of what. Just a second. Yeah, of what you are filing, right? So, it talked about how you know let's make it even more easier. Let's say you wanted to courier a parcel from USA to Canada, right? So before Madrid Agreement, how was it done? You had to go to your post office, your whatever post office you had, and then you had to write the clear address with your zip codes and all of that of the Canadian address, and then it could reach to Canada. In a similar manner, if you had to courier it to Japan, if you had to courier it to China, the same process you had to do every time. Now that was very cumbersome, costly, and also it took so much time and effort of the companies, and that is why the companies were finding it difficult to file the trademark, and hence it gave us certain timelines of uh, various IPs as to how will they be uh, filed. Okay, so a generalized trademark filing procedure was given in the Madrid Agreement. Now there are um, certain features of the Madrid Agreement. For example, the registration of trademarks was valid only for 20 years, which we still practice, that trademarks can be registered only for 20 years. Again, you have a renewal clause wherein every 10 years you can renew and all of that. But then initially it was just talked about as 20 years monopoly. Okay. Then, uh, and then it also talked about a similar kind of process of getting it filed in all of the countries. Okay, so you had to file a trademark application. That application should have the mentions of your colors, your fonts, whether it is a logo, whether it is a design, all of that you should mention. And then you should mention whether you want a particular color or every color and all of that, right? So that came out in the Madrid Agreement. So, Paris Convention was the foundation. Then the Madrid Agreement is the first filing system. Now, even though Madrid Agreement existed, there still came about certain problems as to why, how can I, or when can I, file my trademark. So let's say, for example, ABC Limited is a company who can run a tech business. Again, ABC Limited is a company in another country who can, uh, an applicant can file. There is no limit as to in how many countries you can file. You just have to check whether the country that you want to file into is a member of the treaty or not. That is only the limitation that you have to check. Other than that, there is no limits as to at a single particular time how many times you can do it. Okay. Yeah. So there was still a problem as to ABC Limited was a tech company and then there was other ABC Limited, who was a tech services company. And then there was third ABC Limited, who was a FMCG company, right? So then when all three of them went in to get their trademarks registered, if any of them was a first person, then the other two must have been rejected. So there was a little confusion whether, okay, Coca-Cola is also selling cold drinks. Coca-Cola is also there when you talk about your t-shirts, your hoodies, and then Coca-Cola is also there when you talk about your stationery, right? So that was the main confusion that happened which was not solved in the Madrid Agreement, and that is why we came to the Nice Agreement. I hope the Madrid Agreement is clear so that we can move to the Nice Agreement. Okay. So, just to conclude again, the Madrid Agreement is that Madrid Agreement was a one filing system. It brought about one system to file your trademark in multiple countries, but it also talked about being cautious whether whatever you are doing, wherever you are registering, you do not have same trademarks in the country. Okay, so that was a main caution that happened, and that is why we had the Nice Agreement. Now, this is our third stop in the Trademark Express, right? So third stop is the Nice Agreement of the 1957. Now, when you talk about the Nice Agreement, it is also the agreement that brought about your Nice classification, the 45 classes of the trademark. Now, this 45 class system of trademark, wherein the first 34 classes talked about your goods, and the next talked about the remaining talked about your services. Now, how does this basically work is, it works on the main principles that, taking an example of the Coca-Cola, right? So if I want to register my trademark as Coca-Cola, who is a beverage company, so then as per the Nice classification classes, I will be doing it in whatever class I have. Now, if somebody else, let's say one of you, wants Coca-Cola to be registered as a trademark for something which is a wood and timber company, right? So if Coca-Cola is not registered as a wood and timber company in that particular wood and timber class of the Nice classification, then you will be getting the trademark. Otherwise, you will not be getting a trademark. I hope how these classes are working is clear. If you want, I can give you one more example. Let's take an example of uh, let's take an example of let's say a company named, okay, let's take a company named IP Varna. Okay, now IP Varna in India is registered as a trademark as a legal research organization um, talking about disseminating knowledge on the intellectual property rights. Now, on the very same hand, Jury comes up with a subordinate company which they also name as IP Varna, but they want it to be known as a merchandise company who sells law student oriented stationaries and study materials, right? So they will find their own class and they can register. If nothing named as IP Varna is registered in their class, then they'll get the trademark. Let's say, for example, they have class 21. Yes. So that is how we'll take this well-known marks question at the end. Please, because we have moved to the new treaty, we'll take it at the end. Now, when you talk, so that is how the classes work. Okay, so a same company can be registered in various classes according to the Nice Agreement. Okay, so for example, you can think it as your IP addresses. Okay, so IP addresses are unique to every particular website. In the same way, this Nice classification is for a brand is unique to whatever its main source of work is, right? But then there are certain problems with the Nice classification, which talks about it is purely administrative. Okay, it determines where your goods and services will fall. Okay, it does not talk about whether your trademark is valid or not, or whether you have the rights or not, or whether you have the protection or not. Okay, it then depends on the national law. So NICE agreement has brought about 45 classes, but then it says that in case there is any problem as to whether the particular brand has monopoly over that mark or not, that will depend on the respective domestic laws of the country. Okay, so it does not cater to whether this particular classes will be universal to me. The Madrid Agreement said that with one particular application, you can apply to various countries. Now, then came the problem of what about the reputation of the brands. So then NICE agreement came into force, but then still the NICE agreement did not solve the problem of whether I have that monopoly over my brand or not. It said that the domestic laws will take care of it. It did not give a unified or a universal law as to what will happen. I hope all these three treaties are clear so far. Okay. Okay, thank you. Now we move on to the next part, which says the fourth stop, which is the Madrid Protocol. Madrid Protocol came in 1989, which, modernized the filing procedure. Okay. So initially during the Madrid Agreement, which, brought about filing system the very first time in the IP jurisprudence, it said that I need to register in my native country in order to get trademark into different other countries. Right? That is what it said. But then Madrid Protocol said that only in one single application can you file your trademark for multiple countries at a time. Right? So it said that now why was this a problem? Okay, why did this particular problem exist? There was no problem into saying that, okay, I have my registration, I can any which ways go to 20 countries, 25 countries and get my registration as per the Madrid Agreement. But then why did you need Madrid Protocol when you already had Madrid Agreement, right? So then they said that let's take an example of during 1980s, the USA was the world's largest economy, and it was a most important trademark hub for the world during those times, right? So United States was refusing to come into collaboration with the other member countries for a filing for a unified filing system, right? So it refused to come into Madrid Agreement, and that is why we brought about Madrid Protocol, wherein we said that, okay, based on one application you can file your trademarks, but not based on your registration, right? So the main point was USA said that even though you are registered in India, we do not we would want to reject you because some domestic law of our country is violating. But Madrid Agreement did not give them that power, and that is why Madrid Protocol came into force, and it gave them that power. That, okay, if India has registered, that doesn't mean that USA, Canada, Japan will also register. If it goes against their part, then they will reject it, right? So this simplified the process as to domestifying it, or not globalizing IP jurisprudence per se, right? So this is a major difference between the Madrid Protocol and the Madrid Agreement. So Madrid Agreement came first. You can, if you really want to memorize who came first and what was the problem, you can understand that Madrid Agreement, A comes first, right? So Madrid Agreement came first, and it basically gave a filing system that I will have to register myself in my native country, and then I can apply for my trademarks in n number of countries that I want to. That is what Madrid Agreement said. Now, when you talk about Madrid Protocol, it's MP. P comes after A. So Madrid Protocol came after the Madrid Agreement, and it came merely to modernize the filing system. It said that at one point you can register you can apply at the same time. Okay, it doesn't matter whether you have already registered in India or not. I mean, whether you have registered in your native country or not. Right? So this is a major difference between the Madrid Agreement and the Madrid Protocol. Okay, now it also talked about the intergovernmental organizations that can join. Okay, so for example, during those time, the European Union was there in force, right? So the various countries in European Union could come together and bring their single, filing procedure, and all of those liberty was also given to the member nations, right? I hope the fourth stop is now clear, and the major difference between the second and the fourth stop. Okay. Yeah, thank you so much. Now we move on to the fifth stop. Okay, now fifth stop talks about the trademark law treaty, which came into force in 1994. Now it says that, okay, I can register. 18-month period is basically the refusal that we discussed. Okay, so the domestic laws violation, and there are certain other criteria as to when can a company refuse your trademark. So for that, it is given a time limit that, okay, if I apply to USA, Canada and Japan at once, let's say on 1st January 2026, it has 18 months period, that is 1st June 2027, to either accept my trademark application or refuse my trademark application. Okay, that is the time limit that is given to them. Okay, now moving to the fifth stop of our Trademark Express, which is the Trademark Law Treaty. Now it came into force in 1994. Now when you say that, I have the right to file my trademark in n number of countries I want to, right? So then there arose a problem of, that means you consider yourself a global mark, right? Because if I have that monopoly that, okay, on India, Japan, the whole of South Asia, I've registered my trademark. Then I move to the whole of Central Asia, I register my trademark. I go to Australia, I get my trademarks registered there. Okay, so then it came about getting monopoly all over the world, which was again a problem because it was unfair to the competitors, right? And there was no choice to the consumers as well. So that is when Trademark Law Treaty came into force, and it said that you will have a formal limit as to how many times you can, register your trademarks. So, for example, it said that it basically brought about the thing that whether you will be using your mark or whether you will be use your mark in the future. So what happened actually was, people used to file their trademarks in n number of countries, but then they never used that trademark, right? So that is why the competitors had problem, and the consumers were also confused whether this trademark exists, but then what kind of products or what kind of services are they providing to us? We are not getting anything. That is when this Trademark Law Treaty said that you have to mention whether you are already using your trademark or not, or whether you will be use your trademark or not. And then two options were given to the people. Now, whether if you select that you are already using your trademark, you will have to provide evidence to that. Let's say any of your invoices or your logo or the address of your office or any property that you have in the name of your trademark. That such kind of evidences you had to provide. And then secondly, if you say that I am intending to use my trademark, then they said that, okay, based on the domestic laws, we will give you a time limit to start using your trademark. Let's say, for example, any remote country says that within 6 months of your trademark application, you should have to start your use your trademark. If you don't use it, we'll cancel your application and we'll keep that trademark open for anybody else to come and register. right? So that is, these two basic things came into force when you talk about trademark law treaty, for just and fair competition, and also for the consumers to get better goods and services at a competitive price, and they could get choices and all of that. Okay. And it also said that even though you can file trademark for n number of things, and in n number of countries, it does not mean that you will be a global trademark. Okay, you should use your trademark in each and every country that you are filing it. Okay, so if let's say IP Varna is filed in India, USA, China, Japan, and Canada. So in all five of this country, I should either provide my service or my goods, whatever class I have registered myself in those countries. Right. So that is what was main problem that was solved by the trademark law treaty. I hope the trademark law treaty is clear. Now, okay, let's take another example. Take an analogy from, you can consider it as your speed limit. Okay, so in the roads, on the highways, you have these, speed limits, 40 kilometer per hour for a four-wheeler, or maybe 60 kilometer per hour for a six-wheeler, and all of that. Right, so that is what trademark law treaty did. Okay, either you drive on a 40 kilometer per hour, that is either you already use it and then register, or either you drive it at a 60 kilometer per hour, but then make sure that within whatever domestic law says, within that time you start using your trademark. Right, I hope it is now a little more clear. Okay, when then we talk about the sixth stop in our trademark express, which is the CIS anti-counterfeiting agreement, which came into force in 1999. Now, till the trademark law treaty, what we had was a universal agreement happening for the trademark jurisprudence, right? This was the first one wherein regional agreements started getting into place. Okay, so for example, you know, your international trademark is top class in every country that you have registered. It is very well, it is good, it is first class. But then there were still certain fake goods or the counterfeiting goods that would flow from across the borders, and that is why, to curb these things, the regional enforcement framework was brought about, which was basically done by the Commonwealth of Independent States. Now, again, going back to the history, in this time the Soviet Union fragmented, right? So when the Soviet Union fragmented, the countries who were the part of Soviet Union, the USSR, had to also look into the matter of the IP governance, right? So they were the one who came about the CIS anti-counterfeiting agreement, and they said that, okay, fine, we were part of trademark law treaty, we were part of Madrid agreement, we are part of Madrid protocol, but now since we are 15 different new countries, now what we will do of the already existing trademarks that were there in our countries? So that is when the anti counterfeiting came into force, and they said that uh, the border measures were done to stop the counterfeiting goods, and they said that there will be a cooperation between the custom authorities of these 15 fragmented countries, and they will make sure that the trademarks that were registered before USSR fragmented, those trademarks will still stay into force as a single unit. Now, after the fragmentation is when you will be able to do it. Okay, is when you will be able, when you will have to apply for trademark in all the 15 different states. Right, so this is the first regional agreement that came into force. I hope the regional agreement, the first agreement, is clear. The sixth stop. Okay. Then we move on to the seventh stop, which is almost we are almost completing the journey of our Trademark Express, which is the Benelux Convention of 2005. Now, this is also another regional agreement that came into force. Okay, so this is Benelux talks about BE, which is Belgium, NE is Netherlands, and just yeah, NE is Netherlands, and Lux stands for Luxembourg. Okay, so these are three different sovereign nations who had their own own legal systems, own parliaments, and everything. But then still, in order to unify the trademark law, because these are very small nations per se, right? So they came together and they built a single IP office, which they said that the Benelux Office for Intellectual Property. So here, if I want to register my trademark in Belgium, then by default my trademark gets registered in Netherlands and also in Luxembourg, because I will file my trademark in the BOIP, which is the Benelux Office of Intellectual Property. They said that to register your trademark in our country, you'll have to file only one application, and your trademark will be registered in all three of us. Okay, this is what the Benelux Convention talked about. Both the CIS and the Benelux took into consideration the major universal laws of the already previous existing agreements, but then they also said that okay, because we have that power to do it domestically, we will be doing this as well. Okay, so this is how the Benelux Convention came into force. Now, somebody will ask, why is this necessary when you already have your universal treaties existing, right? So this is basically A, because these are very small countries. Okay, B, it is difficult for such small countries to regulate these kind of things, because it requires during those time, obviously it required manpower, it required lots of revenue and lots of cost to be incurred, right? So that is why, to help and cooperate with all three of them, and since they are also very near to each other, they did this. Okay, and then CSI, I mean the USSR treaty, the 1999 treaty came into force, just basically because the problem of what will happen to the existing trademarks after we have fragmented. Okay, so these were the major problems. There were no problems as to the procedural aspect of the trademark jurisprudence. It was the regional problem that existed, and that is why these two treaties came into force. I hope all the 7 destinations till now are clear. To give you another example, just as the Benelux Convention, we also have the European Union of Intellectual Property, right? So this is like, we have not discussed it today, but a general practical example as to they also brought about a similar kind of agreement as the Benelux Convention. Okay. Okay, now since this is clear, we finally come to the destination of our Trademark Express. That is the latest, treaty that was signed. Apart from the changes and amendments that took place in all of these treaties that we have discussed till now, which was the Singapore Treaty of the 2006. Now, in the 90s and in the early 2000s, the world started shifting from industrialization and globalization to digitalization. Okay, we had computers, private, the small personal computers that you have. We also had mobile phones in certain countries, the smartphones in certain countries, right? So then it came about, what about the digital age, right? I can register my trademark in n number of countries, but what about my how will I be able to do it now? Because it is very tedious for me. I have to file all the papers. I have to get prints from them. I have to mail them. I have to courier them. This is so much tedious. Because we now have an improved technology, I want it to be electronically, I can file it electronically. So that is when Singapore Treaty came into force. And then another problem was about non-traditional marks. Now, what do you mean by non-traditional marks? Trademark law basically, initially, it said that trademark law will consider only your brand names and your logos. Now, because we started to come to digitization, you also had your colors, you had your sounds, the music tones, right? So, for example, the Tiffany blue of the Tiffany and Co. jewelry brand, or for example, your the Apple tune or the Jingle Bells tune. Then you also had your cartoons and all of that coming up, right? In your televisions and various other characters, right? For example, your Mickey Mouse, right? So this was a problem whether can I get monopoly over these things or not? A sound, a color, uh, a image, right? So that this is where the Singapore Treaty said that okay, because the technology is shifting, because we are evolving, because we are developing, we will allow these kind of marks as well. And then they gave them non-traditional marks. And then we have non-traditional marks, we have certain different types. The olfactory marks, which talks about various smells, right? So the smell of the first rain, the smell of the wetland, the smell of particular brand perfume and all of that. Then we also had sound marks. Okay, for example, your Jingle Bells tune, or maybe your iPhone ringtone, or maybe your MGM ringtone, right? Then we also had your holograms, which talks about the 3D brand banners and all of that. We also have your designs and all of that coming up. So this is the Singapore Treaty catered to these main problems. A, you can now easily file your applications electronically, and B, new age marks will also be given the trademark rights. Right. So this is how the whole trademark jurisprudence came into force. I hope this is clear to everyone. All the this thing. Okay, before we move to the geographical indication, this are the basic conclusion of all these treaties. Paris Convention got about the core principles. The Madrid Agreement talked about multi-country filing. Then the Nice Agreement gave us the classification. Madrid Protocol gave the modern filing system. The Trademark Law Treaty talked about the procedural rules, right? So a limit into how and when you will be able to apply. Then the CIS anti-counterfeiting talked about enforcement in USSR, right? The Benelux Convention talked about regional single system in the three countries. And then finally, Singapore Treaty talked about the modern changes in the trademark jurisprudence, right? I hope the conclusion is also clear. Now, the Trademark Express basically said us that registration is just the ticket. You need to enforce your trademarks to get through the journey. Okay. So when the foundation was laid, it only talked about registration. Now, slowly and gradually, as the development happened, it said that now you also need to enforce your trademark. You also need to use your trademark. You also need to apply into various countries, getting into new layer every time. Okay. So this was basically your Trademark Express with eight stops over around 123 years that it took to what we study trademark law today. And it said that it basically teaches us that any law which has to come into force, it takes slow processes, and it has to go through certain developments, and it has to cater to the developments in order to be at what stage it is currently, right? I hope this is the Trademark Express is clear and we have successfully, all of us together have come to the destination. If I can get thumbs up or any questions related to trademark, we'll just cover it right now only. If anybody has a question, please put it in the chat box. Okay, so the first question that we had to cater was the well-known marks would be an exception to this right. Yes, well-known marks were considered as an exception to the actual trademark right that you had. Any other question that we have? That is why well-known marks were given the ability, privilege as to if even if you have not registered, but everybody in your jurisdiction knows you as a particular, as a particular brand, then you were given the status of well-known mark. Okay, we do not have further questions. So now since we have landed, since we have come to our railway station again, we have to board a new train, which is the GI Express. The geographical, okay. Is trademark registration compulsory? Yes, trademark registration becomes compulsory if you want to enjoy your monopoly and if you want to, get your rights covered and stop counterfeiting and, copying of your work and your brand. That is why trademark is compulsory. Okay, we have another question. Where brands transfer through online marketplace. How should trademark law reconcile the traditional doctrines of territoriality and discrimination with the need to prevent transnational consumer confusion, ensuring that such protection does not evolve into a tool for anti-competitive, particularly in cases where well-known marks non-traditional? Okay, so I agree that this problem exists. Okay, that you have a problem of the last TTV came into force was 2006, where we were just digitalizing. Now we have moved to the second part of digitalization, which is the AI, or maybe, still there exist the territoriality and the jurisdictional problems in IP laws. So one way to do that is reframe your NICE classification. According to me, these are my own point of view. So you can reframe your NICE classification as to the current NICE classification talks about same brand registering themselves in various other classes in various other countries. Okay, so Coca-Cola in India can be a beverage company, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Coca-Cola in USA is also a beverage company. Coca-Cola in USA can be let's say, for example, textile industry, right? So this is the main confusion that is happening right now as to what basically a brand is doing. So you can reframe your NICE classification in a way that one brand, if it has received trademark for one particular thing, it automatically stops other companies from coming up with that same name for X number of things that they want. So, for example, in the new NICE classification that I suggest, it would be that if IP Varna is a legal research organization in India, then even if another IP Varna comes up in Canada that says that we are a stationery company, its trademark should not be given. So this will, give me that privilege and give me that justification that, okay, you are given that, you are given that monopoly and you have that right that only you will use IP Varna, none other than you will be using IP Varna. You can do that. And secondly, what you can do is you can bring about a whole different new procedure henceforth. These are two basic things that you can do, as in how when time needed we brought about the Madrid agreement, then because time wanted something new, we also accepted the Madrid protocol. In the same way, you can bring about certain system that can come into picture right now as per what is happening right now in the world, right? Another question, can a brand deliberately design its trademark to mimic consumer trust cues, government symbols without infringing existing marks? And should trademark law intervene even in absence of confusion? Okay, so should trademark law intervene even in absence of confusion? No, not currently. It is not allowed currently. But if a new procedure is established, then okay, trademark law can allow. Now, why should it not? Because it is based on your domestic laws as well. These treaty act as a universal skeleton. Okay, the member countries are free to modify these laws, these articles as per their own domestic needs. So that is why until unless you don't universalize your trademark laws, you will the trademark law itself cannot intervene into such things that are happening, the mimicking and all of that. And can a brand deliberately design its trademark? So when you talk about the commercial aspect of it, maybe it is okay, it is valid. But when you talk about the morals and ethics, because law can never be distant from the social aspect of it, right? So law is always taken into consideration, considering the social aspect or the social conditions of particular jurisdiction, right? So commercially, yes, it is okay, but on a moral and ethical perspective, it is wrong. And that is why the moment such brands come up, they get instant fame and all of that, but they cannot sustain themselves because somewhere or the other any objection comes out, right? And these objections can be raised when you talk about the trademark filing process. Okay, the public at large has this option to object any particular trademark. If you really want to go into the process of this trademark, we are arranging for a certificate course in so IP1 and Jurywine are working together to bring about a certificate course which is starting from the 16th April on the trademark laws, right? So if anybody who's interested, who wants to learn the trademark process and how these, how can you object and why should you object and all of that, what trademarks can be registered, what cannot be registered, you are free to register. It is a paid certificate course. The details will be shared to you soon. This is the last question that we'll be taking. Then we'll talk about GI and then finally we'll come to the questions again. Any time limit for the use of trademark? Yes, we discussed the time limit, that is 20 years. Okay, you have a 20-year timeline till by then you can use your monopoly, and after that you have a renewal period of 10 years each. Okay, so you have to again pay some kind of fee according to your domestic law, whatever fee that your domestic law says. That is, then you can give your renewal. You can renew your monopoly. You can renew your trademark. Okay. Who owns the rights of AI generated content? Is trademark necessary for that if AI agent is generated? Okay, so when you talk about AI generated content, it is not in the purview of trademark, it comes into the purview of copyright. And since we do not have any universal, there is a gray area existing right now. We surely need certain legislations or certain treaties, just like what we are doing right now, what we had in the past to cater to this, right? So we'll wrap up the question answer session. We'll move to the GI part, and then at the end we'll again start with your questions. Okay, so the second train that we'll be boarding is the GI Express. Okay, only 4 stops. Okay, it also had the Paris Convention that we studied. The first stop in our Trademark Express was also a part of, also discussed about geographical indications, but it did not give a broader overview of what will be geographical indications. So these were the 4 main treaties that are existing right now for the geographical indications. Okay, so it talks about how the world has moved from vague and vague rules for regional products to WTO backed global standards for such regional products. Okay, we have covered a journey from that. So it talked about the anti-fraud border measures to WTO enforceable global standards, and it has gone through over 111 years of the journey to see what GI today is. And still GI has certain problems still existing, but then still they have somewhere or the other tried to do that. Okay, so the very first stop being the Paris Convention 1883, which talks about introduce the concept of indications of source. Okay, so the Paris Convention, when it talked about the native trademarks, it also said that indications of source that will be given as geographical indications. Okay, so from where does this exist? Okay, so the example of Champagne, right? The Champagne is a place in France, and that is why the wine that is made in Champagne is known as a Champagne, right? It is not because some brand has that uh, monopoly or some brand has that IP, right? It is because of the place that it originates from. Similarly, we also have the um, oranges from Nagpur, the Ratnagiri Alfonso. We also have the Kutch embroidery. We have the Assamese Darjeeling tea, right? So these talks about from where this product have come into place. So there is a major difference between what are trademark laws and what are geographical indications, right? Trademark laws talks about the capital side of your work. It talks about my brand, my name, how my goods will be recognized in the market. Whereas the geographical indication talks about the social aspect of it, the societal, the larger aspect of it. It says that this particular good has come from this particular area. It gives importance to the regional communities, the regional minorities, and the specificity or the uniqueness of that particular place when we talk about geographical indications. There is also this difference that a trademark law has to be compulsorily registered if you want to enjoy your monopoly and your rights, but to enforce your rights. But there is no necessity for geographical indications to be compulsorily registered, right? For trademarks, you have only single person or a single company who can register. But for geographical indications, a community or group of people or group of companies as a whole can register majorly based on the region. Okay, so let's say, for example, a US based company cannot file a geographical indication saying that the Indian based company cannot file trademark saying that the California apples are also ours, because it basically talks about the region, the geography, uh, the the place where it originates from in a natural situation, right? So this is the major difference between your trademarks and your geographical indication. Now we come to the very first stop of your GI Express, which is the Paris Convention, the 1883, which briefly talked about geographical indication, and it said that wherever the source is, natural source comes out, that is our geographical indication, right? It basically, you can, if you want to get an example, it talked about product of India, made in France, made in China, made in USA. That is what geographical indications was basically when you talk about Paris Convention, right? So this was the first stop of the GI Express. I hope the GI Express is clear. Sorry, the Paris Convention, the first stop of the GI Express is clear. Because Paris Convention did not give much more importance to geographical indication, we are, summing up it very shortly. Okay. Now, the Paris Convention, sowed the seed as to what will be geographical indication. But then what system will it follow? How do you register? Who will get the monopoly? Who will get the right? Whose intellectual property it is? All of that was not considered in the Paris Convention. And that is why we had the Madrid Agreement for indications of source. Now, it came in 1891. Now, this is very different from the Madrid Agreement of the trademark law. Okay, the Madrid Agreement of the trademark law only and only talked about the filing system of trademarks. Okay, and it the same name comes merely because the place of the agreement is same, that is Madrid in Spain, right? But both these treaties are different. The trademark treaty of the Madrid Agreement of Trademarks talked about the filing system that it brought about, but the Madrid Agreement of the Indication of Source, that is the GI, the Madrid Agreement of GI, talked about the original claims. It talked about how will the geographical indications be identified? How will the geographical indications be given that monopoly, that intellectual property? Okay, that came into force in the 1891. Okay, so what basically it did was, because the Paris Convention gave you the liberty that, okay, if, if Ratnagiri Alfonso is produced, so what people did was, anybody from Japan came up and said that this is my Ratnagiri Alfonso, and this sold it in the market. So it created a problem of counterfeiting and false claims, okay, false claims of the source of their good. And that is why Madrid Agreement came into force, and it said that it will be completely dependent on the quality of the good. Okay, it will depend on the source of the good, and it will depend on the techniques of the good, right? So techniques in certain cases, the procedure in certain other cases, right? So that is what Madrid Agreement gave you the clarity on. It also said that if a particular let's say, for example, if pashmina shawl is not from pashmina, then you cannot say it is a pashmina shawl. You'll have to give it another name, right? You let's say, for example, I do not sell oranges which are from Nagpur, but I sell oranges which are grown in California. So what will I say? These are Californian oranges, and I will not say these are Nagpurian oranges, right? So this is what differentiation brought about in the Madrid Agreement. It basically tried to stop the counterfeiting of the sources, because geographical indication was majorly related to the natural products, the agricultural products, and the textiles. Majorly during those times, geographical indications was related to that. So this was our, you can consider it as it brought about a sheriff in your market who used to check you, who used to check your token. If your token is valid, then only you were given the entry into the market. That is what the Madrid Agreement of Indication of Source did. I hope the second stop of our GI Express is clear. Okay, now we move on to the third stop of our GI Express, which is the Lisbon Agreement. Now, the Lisbon Agreement came into force in 1958. Now, there is a huge gap between the Madrid Agreement and the Lisbon Agreement. Madrid Agreement came into 1891, and the Lisbon Agreement came into 1958. Almost 65 to 70 years of gap, right? So now, why was this much gap? We did not see this much years gap in the trademark, right? But we are still seeing it in the geographical indication. This is merely because as soon as the trademark law started getting developed, the companies, the monopolization, the industrialization, the digitization helped it amp up in such a manner that the other parts of the intellectual property had to back down. They had to slow down in their development process. And also because geographical indication is a very crucial and a very critical aspect. Okay, you have to go through many processes, expert, registrations, tests, and certain. There is a lot of procedural things happening when you want to register your GI, and that is why even if the problems existed, they were not addressed, right? So then finally, after 65 to 70 years, we had the Lisbon Agreement in the 1958, which said that there will be a GI registration system. Okay, so now what kind of what kind of system that it brought about? It said that it will be a dedicated system to register your GI internationally. Okay, it also said that if a producer is a group of people, or if a producer is a community of people of the member countries, then it can file appellation of origin in WIPO. By this time, WIPO was already established. Now, what is WIPO? WIPO is the World Intellectual Property Office, right? So by this time, WIPO was already established, and it said that, for example, the Swiss chocolates. Okay, so people from the companies from Switzerland would all have that liberty to say that this is a Swiss chocolate, but somebody sitting in Sri Lanka does not have that liberty, making the chocolate in the land of Sri Lanka and saying that this is a Swiss chocolate. Okay, before the Lisbon Agreement, it was very easy for them to do that. Okay, any Sri Lankan company would say that this is a Swiss chocolate and they would sell it in the market, right? But the Lisbon Agreement stopped all of this, and it said that it will be purely based on your natural habitat, how the product is made, how the product is sold, how the product will be marketed, what specificity, what novelty, what uniqueness that product has. That is how you will be given your geographical indication. And it gave out the whole system of how this can be done. Now, India is also party to this, and it is it is there. It also has established a system of it, right? So if somebody here who is interested to just know what process goes through in India especially, and more or less all the other member countries have accepted the Lisbon Agreement as a skeleton legislation, and some major procedural aspect have been changed by the countries. So somebody who is interested to know about specifically Indian process, they are welcomed in another certificate course that will be starting from the 26th or 27th of April. The details again will be shared to you very soon. This is again a paid certificate course. So we are bringing up two certificate courses, one for trademarks and the other for geographical indications. If anybody who's interested can ask us. Okay. No individual can register a geographical indication, because geographical indication is majorly for, as we discussed, it is a societal aspect, it is a public at large aspect, and it also talks about the region, the source from where this has been brought about. Okay, so that is why individuals cannot file for geographical indications. Now, this was about the Lisbon Agreement. It said that an appellation of origin requires that all of the product qualities should be matched. So if the Swiss company says that the Sri Lankan Swiss chocolate is false, it should show the differentiation. It should show that, okay, Swiss chocolates are derived from this particular cocoa tree, then they are processed in this particular temperature, in this particular method, by sieving this, by melting this, by shaping this way. All of that should be you should have that evidence in order to say that, okay, those are not Swiss chocolates, but we are the Swiss chocolates. Okay, so what did Lisbon Agreement do? The Lisbon Agreement said that we will you will not be able to register your geographical indication merely because you are saying that I am a Pashmina shawl, or merely you are saying that I am a orange from Nagpur. You'll have to prove that, and you'll have to show me certain qualities that you are having which match with the original Nagpur oranges, or which match with the original Pashmina shawls, or which matches with the original Californian almonds. Right, so this is what Lisbon Agreement did, and it also gave out a skeleton registration system of the geographical indication. Okay, so for example, if you we already took an example of the Swiss chocolates, we can also take an example of Darjeeling tea from Assam. Okay, Assam is a place in India. If somebody who is out of India, who is not a who doesn't have that context, so Assam is a place in India, and Darjeeling tea was the first GI registration of India, and it said that whatever it said that the Darjeeling tea has a particular size of the grain. The tea has a particular size. The tree had a particular aroma. The tea was cultivated over a specified season with specified tools, with specified fertilizers and manures. And if you check all of these boxes, then and then only will we give you the Darjeeling tea. Okay, so this is how Lisbon Agreement brought about the ease of how geographical indications will be registered. I hope the third stop is now clear. Okay. Also, there was a point before the Lisbon Agreement that said that if I am country A and there is a country B, I would regionally negotiate with country B and say them that whatever products you are making, we will say that it is A's product. Okay, so you will sell it in the name of my country, which was also wrong again, because my country has different kind of temperatures and seasons and land and different kind of artistic and crafts people, right? And your country have different people and different artistic values. So that is why you cannot make it a point that okay, country B will be making it, but country A will be saying that this is my geographical indication, because the main aspect of geographical, the name itself, is not met when you do these things. That is why Lisbon was necessary. Now we come to our final destination in the GI Express, which is our TRIPS agreement. Now, TRIPS agreement also talked about the trademarks. Okay, so so before the Singapore Treaty, it already gave the widened aspect of the well-known marks and certain procedural gaps that existed. It already covered that in the trademark part as well. But when we talk about the GI, okay, when we talk about the geographical indications, TRIPS agreement said that it will be the geographical indications will be monitored by the World Trade Organization, and it will have a list, it will have records of all the geographical indications all throughout the globe. Okay, so whether you are a member or not, whether you have signed the TRIPS or not, the geographical, if you say that this is my geographical indication, the WTO should know that it is your geographical indication. The WTO should maintain your records, and it also said that all the 164 members of this TRIPS agreement should also apply the similar GI registration system and should also check of certain qualities that were discussed earlier, which is the particular form in which you are growing, the size of the grain, or maybe the way you are making your textile, or the way you are painting your art, or the way you are making your spirit, or the way you are fermenting your raw products to get a new to get a finished product to sell in the market. All of this should be given a particular universal aspect, and all the member nations of the TRIPS agreement should sign to it. Now, why was TRIPS necessary, and what did TRIPS do to the GI ecosystem? Okay, so what did it do? That it created a two-tier protection system for the geographical indications. It said that okay, geographical indications require a protection. Yes, they require a protection because it boosts the employment of the regional communities. It also gives you standards in your country, the standards in the global economy and all of that. But then it also is useful to not mislead people into believing that okay, whatever tea you are selling is not Darjeeling tea. That is why TRIPS cleared all of this doubt that yes, till Lisbon, what was happening was the Lisbon said that protection is necessary, but Tripp said that even the protection is necessary, it is also necessary that you stop people from falsifying. You stop people from giving false claims as to what is happening in the GI market. Right, so it gave a stricter system of GI registration and GI regulation, right? And um, it laid down certain qualities and all of that for the same, and it also uh, you know it gave major importance to wines and spirits. Till Lisbon, it was generalized. Any natural source or any regional craftsmanship would get geographical indication, but they never talked about any wine or any spirit that is made. But Trips talked about wines and spirit because every region in the world has their own way of making their own wines and spirits, right? Although everything is fermented, it is a fermented beverage and all of that, but then the technique of fermenting, many of them have same raw materials, right? But then what quality of raw materials you are using, how many days you will be fermenting them, at what temperature, in what machines, or if you are doing it by hands, how will you do it, how will you do it manually, all of that was different, and hence it gave a more it gave more importance to the wines and spirit as well, apart from the general geographical goods that existed in the market. So it said that geographical indications has to shift from being merely a voluntary IP right to a compulsory global standard. So what this means is, till the Lisbon Agreement, it was on the discretion of the regional communities whether they want their product or their craftsmanship to be given a geographical indication title or not. But after TRIPS agreement, it said that you need to do that if you want want monopoly, or if you want that your heritage or your process is saved and people get original product, the main people can enjoy, the consumers can enjoy that particular uniqueness of your product, it is compulsory for you to get a geographical indication registered. Okay, so this is what it talked about, the geographical indication. I hope that the GI Express was clear. Okay, thank you. We now finally move on to the conclusion part of it, which says that this is a whole architecture of how the trademark laws and how the geographical laws have come into place in the current scenario in the world, right? So we had the principles that laid down, then we had the filing procedures, then we had certain changes in the filing procedures, we had the unifying systems, we had the regional systems, we had the addition of certain other things in the trademarks. We also have when we talk about we then moved from the domestic monopoly to the monopoly, to the global monopolies and all of that. So it although it took over more than a century, it was because of the starting point that it recognized is why we are still here today, standing and learning about what trademark laws are, about what geographical indications are, and how can we as individuals uh, you know protect our trademarks, how can we as individuals protect our geographical indications, how can we protect our heritage, and how can we protect our uniqueness and novelty, right? So this was a whole more than a century architectural mechanism that happened when you talk about this. Now you'll be shortly given the feedback form.